for 11 years actually, and then went on to freelance editing, and now has pretty much an international career working mostly with scientists and researchers in Asia. So she's got strong expertise in medical editing, as well as working with authors with English as a second language. So I was really excited to share her with everyone today. And so Katharine, you can take it away now, I think.
Okay, yay, I'm glad you can hear me now. I ended up in medical editing in a very odd, unplanned way. I got a degree back in my 20s as a journalist, and I started out as a reporter for a mid-sized daily newspaper. I wanted to be the next Woodward or Bernstein, expose political corruption and make everything right. But just a few days into the job, I developed what might have been a migraine. I've never had one since, but it lasted a couple of days, and I ended up in the ER. And that early into the job, missing a couple of days.
Just hit to rejoin. That's all you need to do. Just hit F11. Hit F11.
Am I back now?
I'm going to walk away now.
And anyway, leaving the job, taking time off from work that early on did not sit well with the city editor or the managing editor. So while I was at the ER trying to get this straightened out, the doctors told me the headache was probably because of the stress of starting a career and starting a marriage and moving to a new city all in the span of about 10 days. And the city editor said, well, because you know about being sick, you're going to be our medical editor. No background whatsoever in science. And eventually I went to work for Simon & Schuster, which is a big mainstream publisher in Manhattan, worked there for years. And after a while, the medical editing bug came back and started bothering me again, so I decided to apply to a medical publisher. The managing editor, who had never worked in anything but medical publishing, said, I don't know how working with fiction and autobiographies can translate to medical editing. So you seem qualified, I'll give you the job, but you have to be ready to take any courses in any kind of medical terminology that we want you to take. And I said, sure, okay, and I expected to have to take some courses. That never occurred. I learned on the job, just from constantly reading medical articles, journal articles, medical textbook, and so here I am. Now, what do freelance medical editors work on? We work on medical textbooks for publishers. And more as publishing is changing and there are a lot of independent publishers, you may end up working for with very small publishing companies, 1 or 2 people. In fact, I just did, just a few months ago, a book on urgent care, the practice of urgent care medicine, and then also a book on how to set up your own urgent care medicine practice, written, of course, for physicians who are also entrepreneurs. You can also edit journal manuscripts, and I do this. You can work directly with the journals, or you can work directly with authors, and I mostly work with authors now. There's better money in it, I'll tell you that. You might work on abstracts and posters for medical society conferences. I do some of that. You may work on patient education and patient advocacy materials used in physicians' offices, in patients' rights organizations, things like that. I haven't worked on too many of those items. You might also work in public health publications. Materials for continuing medical education, also known as CME. I do some of that. And the very interesting thing is that I often do work on CME materials written in German and translated into English, or vice versa, and I don't speak German. I work with a freelance medical writer who contracts with me to edit her stuff and make sure it sounds good in English after she's done the translating. You might work on sales or training or marketing materials for pharmaceutical companies. You might even work on some federal documentation for pharmaceutical companies, but a lot of times they want you to do that in-house, and they're generally not going to take you freelance if you haven't had in-house experience doing that, because they all have their own ways of training you. There are lots of federal regulations to learn. It's very involved. You might do slide presentations for corporations and authors, and again, I edit those in PowerPoint, and I really hate editing in PowerPoint because it doesn't have track changes the way Microsoft Word does. But the topics are interesting. You might work on grant applications for grant writers and for individual researchers. Now, you're not writing the material, but you're editing it. You're making sure it follows the protocols for the grants. And you're just, making sure it's in good shape. You might work on regulatory documents for government agencies. You could work on website content. For a brief time a few years ago for WebMD, I filled in when the managing editor went on maternity leave, the chief staff copy editor stepped up to fill in for her. So I then was brought in freelance, and I didn't have to go to the office. I sat comfy in my jammies in my own office and filled in for that copy editor. And it was really great. It was like being back on a newspaper, working on deadline. You had to meet the deadlines. You may work on white papers too. So there's all sorts of stuff you can do. You're not just necessarily working in the publishing industry. So if you're looking into this career change or this arena change, don't just go for the traditional publishing arena. You can make lots more money outside of working with publishers. Now, what are we watching for medical and science editors when we're working on the materials? First, of course, the basic spelling, punctuation, grammar that any other editor would look for, but most medical material or science material has a lot of tables and figures. You have to make sure that, do the call-outs match, the call-outs in the text, do they match the figure or the table? Has the author borrowed this material? And if so, has the author obtained permission from the original copyright holder to use this article or table in this new manuscript? Legends and figure legends or captions and table footnotes, they have to correspond with the text, but they can't repeat large chunks of the text generally, especially in books and journal articles. Publishers want those materials to be supplements or to expand on the text, not to duplicate them. So if your author goes into great detail in the text, giving all the data for these 4 groups of people in the experiment that they're reporting on, you don't want all that detail in the text. It should be reported in more detail in the table. And finally, sometimes in figures from clinical studies, there will be radiographs from patients, surgical photos, and sometimes the authors will forget to take off patient identification. You'll see patient ID number. You might even see the patient's name. You have to make sure that that's cropped out, or that the proper person is instructed to remove that, because you have to make sure the patient's privacy is protected. Now, we're looking for good use of language. Of course, medical publishing and medical materials are going to have a lot of jargon, but you don't want it to be so full of jargon that it's not understandable except for the most supremely specialized readers. When I'm working on journal articles, I want medical students to be able to understand that understand the material. I want general practitioners to be able to understand it because they may be thinking about getting into the subspecialty that the article is about. And I want the people in the subspecialty to understand. So you have to be aware of your audience. Of course, you have to watch for and make sure inclusive language is used. All patients are not males. You can't leave stereotypes in place, and you need to use person-first language. In other words, you would talk, if the manuscript talks about alcoholism, you would talk about a person or a patient with alcoholism. You would not allow the sentence to stand if it referred to an alcoholic or a drug user. You would say a person with substance abuse issues, something like that. The emphasis is on the person because the person's a whole person that just has this one aspect, this disease, this condition. So that's something you're watching for. And anatomic terms. When I'm working with international authors whose first language isn't English, sometimes they will grab a word that sounds similar to what they think it should, what the meaning they're looking for. And it's not the right word. I came in it was an article on orthopedic surgery, and I saw what I found to be a dentistry term. That just mystified me. And the author from China had, his English was not that good, so it was difficult to talk with him about what he might have meant to say there. And I couldn't guess from just reading. So I talked with several of my different clients from China who had a better command of English, and we conferred on this, and we came up with what was the right term. And I queried my author, and he said, "Oh yes, that's what I meant to say." So you have to do a lot of sleuthing and problem solving. And of course, you're looking for overall issues. Are the conclusions supported by the rest of the text? Are the assertions in the text documented by references? And are they documented by the right references? Did the author renumber the references at some point and oops, you've got a reference about, ocular issues in supposedly documenting discussion about knee surgery. You have to pay attention. Are the headings parallel in structure? Do the headings follow the publication's conventions? You want to get samples of already published materials in the arena that your manuscript is going to appear once it's published, and you can get a good sense of style from that. Now, a lot of editors I know are not wonderful at math. You don't have to be a mathematician to be a medical editor, but you do need to be able to check through and do the numbers add up. If Group A has 10 patients and Group B has 10 patients, the total number should not be 25. Do the percentages add up? If the paper says that 60% of Group A had this adverse reaction, does that 60% match with how many people were actually in Group A? Have the data sets been mixed up? Believe it or not, that happens. People rewrite papers and they rewrite papers and they rewrite papers, and their supervisor tells them to rewrite it. Then the journal tells them to rewrite it. Then, their colleagues come in and cuts, and there's more rewriting, and things get moved around, and you're talking about Group B when you meant to talk about Group A, and it just doesn't make sense. You're not there to catch all the science, to make sure that the science is correct or the medicine is correct, but you have your radar, your antenna up, looking for things that don't quite make sense, and you ask the authors about that. And you do need to know a little bit about statistics. You don't need to be a statistician. Most physicians who do experiments are not statisticians, and they have to pull a statistician in to help them put together their paper. But you do need to know, did the author use standard deviation where she meant standard error of the mean? It's got to make sense. So you're there to question everything. And finally, a big issue, and this occurs not just with native speakers of English, but also with international authors, is plagiarism and patch writing. There's a huge push, you've heard publish or perish. That's been going on in the US and Canada and Europe forever. But as the scientific community in Asia and other places gets going, there's such a big push that I've talked to some Asian researchers, and their jobs depend on getting a certain number of articles published within a certain time period. Sometimes even getting housing, being eligible for the good housing, depends on how often, and how frequently they get published, and whether they get published in the better known journals. So you have to be alert to material that suddenly changes tone from the way the author writes, or suddenly sounds much better written. And you don't even have to have plagiarism detection software. You can just, a phrase that tickles something in your brain, you can even just paste it into your internet browser and look for it, and you may very well get some hits on it. I've had to go back to authors, American authors, Canadian authors, European authors, Asian authors. I've had to go back to them and say diplomatically, this appears to have been published somewhere else. This section, we need to document it, where it's from, and I need you to rewrite it. I'm going to stop editing until you rewrite it in your own words. So, you have to engage in some author relations. Now, how do you get training for this career? You don't necessarily have to have a science degree. You don't have to have an advanced degree. I'm not an MD, although a lot of authors who I work directly with, that's their first assumption, is that I must be an MD to understand this material. But that's not the case. You just need to be widely read. You can take courses and university degree programs. I've listed a few in your handout. Now, this is mostly US centered, unfortunately, because I am here in the US. But there are other places. You'll see, I did list Banff Center there. You'll see, something Canadian. But many of these organizations or universities offer courses for credit or courses for certification, and you don't necessarily have to be an enrolled student, as a full-time student. You can take these courses on your own. The Drug Information Association has really, really, really good courses. I strongly recommend that you look into some of those. And many of these are available online. You do not have to go in person, and that's a wonderful thing. After you've been working for a while as a medical editor or an editor in the life sciences, you might want to consider getting certification. Certification is going to tell your clients that you know what you're doing. I will confess, I only have a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism. I trained on the job. So, I can't say to my authors I have a master's degree in science or, any advanced degrees in science, but I can say, since I took the certification exam through the Board of Editors in the Life Sciences, that I am a board certified editor in the life sciences. And there are editors certified by BELS, the Board of Editors in the Life Sciences, all around the world. They give their examination several times a year in different locations according to where the demand is, and you have to register ahead of time fill out an application, and travel to wherever the exam is. A lot of times it will be at meetings of other associations, similar associations, scientific associations, and that's convenient for everyone to travel to. If you can make it to one of the AMWA, American Medical Writers Association's conferences, or the Canadian chapter's conferences, they have good training sessions, good basic how to write science, how to edit science, how to work with authors, how to be in business for yourself as a science editor. They have loads of good stuff. I can't recommend them strongly enough. The Board of Editors in the Life Sciences does not have educational programs as such. It was set up years ago by AMWA specifically to be a certification body. The Council of Science Editors has some good training. They have members all over the world. Check out their website. The European Association of Science Editors, also known as EASE, they're good. And the National Association of Science Writers, that is in the US. But you know, if you look on these themes and do a thorough search online, there are very well may be more Canada-specific organizations that you can work with. And of course, always be engaged in lots of professional reading. I like the AMWA Journal, the American Medical Writers Association Journal. You do not have to be a member to subscribe to it. And back issues after a year or two back are available free online. You can go to the website and read them. Lots of good stuff. Some basic science articles, some articles about running a business, articles about working with international authors. Just, it's a gold mine of material. You really should read a lot of that. The European Science Editing Journal is the journal of the European Association of Science Editors. That's many articles are available in their archives online. And also Science Editor, the journal of the Council of Science Editors. Again, there are many of those available online too. Now, what kinds of tools do we need for medical editing? Of course, there are style manuals. The AMA Manual of Style is a big one in the industry. It's published by Oxford University Press. You can get a hard copy. You can also subscribe to it online. I prefer the online because it's easier to find things. The index and hardcover isn't that wonderful. You need at least a couple of good medical dictionaries. Two big ones in the industry are Dorland's, published by Elsevier, and Stedman's, published by Wolters Kluwer. And you can get access to online versions, CD versions. You will also want some medical spell checkers. I like Stedman's medical pharmaceutical spell checker software. It integrates with Microsoft Word, and you can buy the version that allows you to subscribe to periodic updates. There are drug names in it, you know, all the anatomical terms, all the scientific terms. It's not good for abbreviations, but for terminology, it's wonderful. For abbreviations, there are plenty of medical reference works out there. I like Stedman's medical abbreviations, acronyms, and symbols. And there are, you know, I mentioned Stedman's spell checker. There's also the Spellex medical spell checking software. This is all in your handout. The links are in your handout, so you can go look those up for yourself. And Inductel has a medical speller too. I have not worked with either of those that much, but there are those who really like them. You will need software that helps speed up the the dog work of editing. Checking that all references in an article, listed in an article, are cited in the text. I like the software reference checker for that. You download it and it integrates with Word. There is also online the PubMed Citation Finder. You can select, copy your entire list of references, plop it into PubMed Online, and you will get a report back as to whether that reference is correct, where you can find more information about it. That's handy, because you don't want to sit there and look up each one of these references one by one. There's also a new subscription-based online tool called Edifix, and it will not only tell you if there are problems with your references, but it will also edit them for you according to the style that you choose. You can choose AMA style, you can choose MLA, you can choose various styles, and they're constantly adding new styles. Eventually they're going to make it, I am told, so that you can upload your style sheet. A particular publisher wants a hybrid type of style for references. You will eventually be able to upload that and have Edifix edit those references for you. And then you can copy them and paste them into your document. And then you've saved your brain for, the tougher parts of the paper. There are additional items in a section of my website called the Copy Editor's Knowledge Base. You will see at the end of the tools section in your handout, you'll see a link there, kokedit.com, and a portion of that is the Copy Editor's Knowledge Base. And there are all sorts of editing tools, software, freeware, software for purchase, reference works, all sorts of items there that you might consider slowly adding to your collection. Now, where do you go to find work in medical publishing or editing? First, of course, you can look to book and journal publishers. I've got a partial list for you in your handout. Some of the names: Academic Press, Canadian Medical Association, Elsevier, Macmillan, McGraw-Hill, Medical Economics, Oxford University Press, Pearson, Sage and Francis, Taylor and Francis, Sage Publications, Wiley. There are lots more out there of smaller ones that, since they're less well known, you may have an easier time getting connected with the right person who hands out freelance assignments. But don't just stop there. Go check with hospitals and medical institutes. They often have publications departments, and they need someone to edit that stuff. Medical schools will have writing laboratories and writing services. They usually have their own staff members to handle that, but a lot of times there is overflow, and they may hire you, contract with you periodically to work on their materials. Check with medical societies and specialty boards, the Pediatricians Association, lots of different specialty boards out there. Medical writing services. This is where, if you are a member of the Canada chapter of the American Medical Writers Association, this will come in handy. A lot of the medical writers contract with big corporations to write materials for them, but they need editors. And if you market yourself to your colleagues in AMWA, you can get subcontracts that way, and they're often quite lucrative. If you really don't know where to begin and you want to build up some experience, you can go with packagers and editing services. Now, what's a packager? A packager is a small company that provides all of the different stages of editing and production for a publisher, because the publisher doesn't have time to deal with it. Now, a lot of times these people don't pay very much. And they expect quick turnaround. But you know, it's somewhere to get your foot in the door if you need to do it. I've got a list here: American Journal Experts, Aptara, Cactus, Charlesworth Group, Editage, Multimed Incorporated. There are a lot of these out there. I wouldn't recommend that you stay with them over the long haul because your income is not going to be that high. But you know, it is a place to start. You can build a customer base, you can get some client testimonials for the quality of your work, you can learn on the job, and then you can gradually move on. Now, you can also get work from government agencies. There's a lot of that out there. It's going to take longer to get paid. The turnaround for invoices could be 60 to 90 days, but once you're in the system, there are plenty of lucrative contracts out there. What really works well for me is colleague referrals through networking. Some of you probably see me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I'm out there talking to my colleagues all the time about what I know about medical editing, about science editing, about the kinds of things that I like to do. And I'm not saying, hire me now, please hire me, I have space in my schedule. But I have become known as somebody who knows a lot about this particular type of editing. And so when somebody runs into a client and says, oh, I need a medical editor, they think, oh, Katharine. And I get a call, or I get an email, and there's a project. If you want a good list of groups to network with, go to my copy editor's knowledge base. That's in the, let's see, the main heading is where to find work in science and medical publishing. And on the 5th page of my copy editor's knowledge base, I have links to all sorts of specialty editorial organizations, their websites, their LinkedIn groups, their Twitter account. You know, find the ones that work for you, and there are a lot of groups there all over the world. You won't get the work unless you're actively participating and actively sharing knowledge so that people see that you know what you're doing. I've gotten work through Facebook groups. You may have heard of the Editors Association of the Earth. A lot of us talk about all sorts of editing issues, and you know, I get work through there. I get work through LinkedIn groups. I get work through having a profile on LinkedIn. I get work through being active in professional organizations. Those of you who, for instance, help set up meetings for your branch of the EAC, you probably are known as somebody who's willing to jump in and get a job done. And doing things like that gets you known. People will think of you when they have projects to pass along. You should also make sure your online profiles for various professional organizations talk about what you can do for potential clients. They shouldn't say, I have this degree, I've attended this training, and I've done this and this and this. If you later on follow some of the links and you look at my LinkedIn profile, at my Twitter profile, you'll see that I talk about what I can do for my clients. I help international authors get past the barrier of language barrier when it comes to publishing. I don't say, you know, I want to work for you because I have a background in medical editing. People who look at those profiles care about their needs and how you can fill their needs. So make sure your profiles, wherever they are online, address that issue. Now, there are also job listing services that you can look to. The American Medical Writers Association has a job list, and you do not have to be a member to look for jobs on that list. The Board of Editors in the Life Sciences has a job list too, that you're required to be a member. The Council of Science Editors, you don't have to be a member, and there's good jobs, in-house and freelance. Medical writer Emma Hitt-Nichols, she puts together a weekly subscription email called the Hit List, and you can sign up for that. She lists all sorts of opportunities in various medical and science publishing arenas. Now, I mentioned that I work with authors who are non-native English speakers. This is a really lucrative and growing field. As I said at the beginning, there's a large supply of authors that need to get published. They have to get published to get tenure, promotions, housing, and they're not going to be well served by a lot of the editing services and the packagers that I talked about, because those services tend to crank things out so that they can make a profit. So if you can find a way to hook into where these authors hang out, you can eventually build yourself a pretty successful practice helping these authors. Now, when you work with an international author whose first language isn't English, you have to do some extra hand-holding. You need to explain the editing process step by step. You need to explain the reasoning behind your edit if it doesn't seem obvious, because perhaps in their language, that type of edit would not have been made, so they want to know why you're doing what you're doing. I have found that in working with these authors, it's better to work with them by email than by phone, because at their leisure, they can reread over what you have said to them as many times as necessary to get all the information they need. Some clients, especially if you work for corporate clients, you will find that they don't want you to suggest solutions when you're editing. They want you to just query. But when you're working with international authors, you're working directly with the authors, I find it often works better to suggest a solution and query. Give them an idea. That gives them an idea of what you're seeing as the problem in their writing, and that helps them come up with the proper solution if they're unsure. Of course, you have to use plain language in your queries, no idioms, no metaphors, and of course you have to watch for, as I said, potential plagiarism. For a lot of my Asian authors, the articles are often missing, A, N, and D. Prepositions will be misused. There'll be a lack of noun-verb agreement, incorrect verb tenses, little things like that you have to watch for. Now, where do you go to find these authors? Trying to open a blog post here. First, you have to make it known that you do ESL, English as the second language editing. It's also called EFL, English as a foreign language. It goes by many names, but you have to make it known. Put this on your business website, put this on your resume. When you're joining an email discussion list, make sure your signature line at the bottom mentions that you do this, because then people will get used to seeing that and will contact you when they know someone who needs an ESL editor. Then you also need to do a version of hanging out where these authors are. If you like to work with university students who need ESL editing, contact at your local university, contact university department heads, and let them know that you are willing to work with these authors and that you are willing to abide by their boundaries for how much and what you can do when working with these authors. If there is any kind of medical association or science association that you like, about a topic that you like to work with, find ways to attend some of the meetings if they're local. Have business cards with you. And know that you're going to have to depend a lot on word of mouth. Whenever I send an invoice to my authors, at the bottom, I always have a note that says, "Thank you so much for the honor of working with you, and I would be thrilled if you would refer me to your colleagues, whatever their medical specialty." I repeat that in the receipts that I send to them for their payments. It's boilerplate in some of my emails. So, you know, you just have to, if you don't ask, you won't get. That's basically it. And now I've gotten through everything I wanted to tell you. I'm ready to answer any questions that you might have. Now, surely I didn't cover all the bases.
Katharine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I think I might turn the camera so that it's facing me. So, so I think it might just be a little bit more personable that way. So I'm going to just change my settings here, and then I can relay any questions if you can't hear an audience member.
Okay.
That well. So let me just camera. Okay, there's me.
How you?
So does anybody have any questions? Leslie.
Hi, Katharine. I'm Leslie, and I come from a clinical research background and tripped into editing when people gave me documents and they loved the way I took them apart just from a scientist perspective. And now I work as a medical writer on clinical trial protocols, but it's always a dimension of peer review. And the head office for my company is in India. So a lot of the peer review I'm doing is, you know, improving the quality of the language. I have two questions. When you were mentioning how the A's and the B's are missing, it's part of my life now. And I've had to learn when I sit with my supervisor, if the email's going from one Indian staff person to another India staff person, I don't worry about the Th's. And then when he has an email that might be visible to the client, he lets me interrupt it every 3 words as we're typing together to put the Th's in. Well, last week, he looked at one of my paragraphs and he said, "Oh, you're missing a the." And he relished the moment, I'm sure, and it's not they appreciate what I bring, but now that I'm reading that language all the time, how do I not become desensitized to the mistake? Because I'm missing a the is, the sky fell a little bit. We all laughed, but the sky did fall a little bit.
That happens. I find that I do so much medical reading, after a while I start going around talking like a physician. Really, you just have to be a well-rounded reader. Do not read medical materials or in the language that you edit for fun. Really, go read some novels. Okay. You have to.
My second question, and this might pertain to all types of technical writing, but it just happened to us 2 days ago. When we have these scientific documents that are going to many different hands, it's going to a team in India, and it's really brilliant because when you have these international collaborations, you get 12 hours from each side, and you get 2 work days every 24-hour period because you collaborate. I'm sure you're familiar with this. And you look extremely unnaturally productive as a team. But sometimes, a few words can get lost in an accidental drag and drop or an accidental delete. And as you know in medical writing, those few words can have such legal liability and quality importance. Is there a way in your routine quality management that, can you catch those things? Is there a way to catch them? You can use word merge, and out of the 27 changes, check that the 25 you intended are there, and can you recognize the other 2? Do you have any tools you use to not lose things?
I hate that when a big committee of people works on everything. I always have track changes set to show the changes by author, not by color, because the settings are individual to each person's computer. But what I also do is I lock the document so that no one can make edits without it being tracked. I've had people do.
You can do that? You can force track changes to stay on?
Yes, you can, at least in Word 2010, that's what I'm working in. Let's see, I'm looking at a document right now, I'll tell you the steps. Let's see, I'm looking at the ribbon, and it said I go to review.
Can you do a screen share, Catherine?
Oh, okay, hold on one
That should be on
second.
your left-hand side.
Yeah. Okay, do you see this now?
No. I'm wondering if you...
Oh, it helps if you click the share button.
Yes. Okay. Can you make it bigger at all? Is there a way to zoom in or...
Let's see.
Oh, it's in Word. I'm wondering if
That bigger?
Yeah, that's a bit better.
Is that better? I've got it at 200%. Is that good enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm up here at the top. I hope you can see my cursor.
Just waiting for my little top menu bar to... Oh, disappear. Okay, that's a bit better. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
And you click on the ribbon, you click Review, and then over to the right, you click Restrict Editing.
Oh, I feel like walking right up to the screen and
I
trying to...
love that tool, yes. And then a menu box opens up, and I choose choice number 2, editing restrictions. I check mark that box. And then from what drops down, I choose track changes. Then I click under item number 3 in the menu box, yes, start enforcing protection. And now I enter a password, and I re-enter it, and click OK.
So that means I can send
Done. You can I can send this document to you. You can edit it, but every single thing you do, deletions, additions, will be tracked. You can't hide a darn thing from me.
So I can, and that's password protected, and when it comes back in-house to the Canada office, I can deactivate it so I can accept a series of changes and delete comments that were addressed. But when I send it out again, I can reinstitute the track changes. So,
Yes,
so
yes.
my day.
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Like you have no idea.
Yeah, you totally just made Leslie's day.
Thank you.
Any other questions about anything to do with medical editing, working with English as a second language? Oh, Smita, sorry, hi. Speak up.
Okay. So I once talked to a medical editor.
Can you hear, Catherine?
Sort of.
Maybe if you could come up, Smita.
Yeah. Come on up. Don't be shy.
Turn right around here. I'm gonna have her come around so she can be right in front of the computer, so.
Okay.
Okay, so I once talked to a medical editor, and she works in-house. And she was telling me that this particular field is really hard to freelance in, especially if you're trying to target pharmaceuticals, because they prefer to hire in-house, or if they do want to freelance, then they would freelance somebody who they worked with before in-house, so they wouldn't just hire a contractor that they don't know. And do you find that that's true with that particular type of company?
Yes, I do. I'm a member of the American Medical Writers Association, which accepts both medical writers and medical editors. And that's what everybody talks about. It's so darn hard to get into working with pharmaceuticals. And you know, they pay super well. If you can get one of those jobs, work there for a few years and make a lot of good contacts, then you can go freelance and you can contract with them and make some really good money. But you really, really do have to do the time. They want to see your face. They want to train you the way and they want things done. That's the one area of medical editing I haven't tried to break into, because at this point in my career, after 20 years, 30 years in total in publishing, I don't want to go work for anybody to get some experience. So yeah, that's the one field that is really tricky to get into freelance-wise.
Okay, I think Leslie has one more question.
Oh, sorry,
That's okay.
just to add to that, you know, the pharmaceutical companies and the contract research organizations have an immense legal and regulatory burden to prove that the people that are handling this research data that's going to decide what drugs are safe and how they can be used safely are appropriately qualified to reliably handle this data. So it's a positive reflection on the field that they have this burden. Some people, and you can speak more to this because I'm new to AMWA, will also join something like the Society of Clinical Research Associates, SOCRA, or the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, and they have some basic, not even experience in the field programs which require accumulated years, but they have basic documentation to show that you've read the Food and Drug Administration laws, to show that you're reliably at least literate with the language and the requirements that you need to follow. And I just wanted to reflect on that. Those requirements are there because of the legal burden. They have to, I see the documents for clinical trials, they have to show all the resumes of all the core people to prove that people were qualified and trained to be allowed to work on the trial at all. So that's where that comes from.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have one more question.
Robin, I was just, it's not so much a question, and I'd just add that I work for pharma occasionally, but on the promo side, and there is an equal regulatory burden on that side, if not more so. They don't need to see my resume, but you do need to be super, super, super careful about what you write and back everything up.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, yeah, one more. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Carrie. I have a practical question. How do you go about billing and receiving payment from clients like in Asia or Europe or?
Oh, how do I deal with payments?
Yes, yeah, from other countries.
I often use PayPal. There are other online, electronic payment services. That's just the one I've used. I've been very lucky. When I work on big projects, book projects or projects with publishers, I generally have a contract that spells out when I get paid, how much I get paid, and everything else. With these individual authors for journal articles, I use my email agreement with them as a contract, and I don't require that they pay anything until I'm done, and I have never been stiffed, and I've been doing that for eons. I spell out everything. I also do a lot of hand holding. My blog name is Editor Mom. Well, I kind of am a mom to these writers, and I talk them through the steps, and they know that I'm there for them. So they're highly motivated to pay me.
Yeah, Robin again.
Related to that, how do you sort of produce an estimate for a project before you start, and how do you do that? I mean,
the only way to do that is I keep really detailed records of how long each type of project takes me, and I've been doing that for years. I have a giant Excel table, and I know that for journal authors, I do 2 rounds of editing. First is the substantive editing. They review, then I do a cleanup edit. We go from there if there's still problems, but usually there aren't. And I know from experience that if I count one manuscript page as 250 words, I proceed at an overall rate of 2 pages per hour. So I estimate that. I build in some, an hour to 2 hours worth of cleanup time or the cleanup round. Just in case there are problems. And once in a while, I pad the estimate a little bit, because every time you get into a manuscript, by the time you're on page 10, there's a problem there that you didn't see early on. So yeah, that's how I do that. And I give them an estimate. I say, my hourly rate is such and such in US dollars, which translates to such and such in Turkish lira. And I do work with Turkish authors, yes, I do. And I estimate that I will need 14 and a half hours to complete work on your paper. If I don't need that much time, I will bill you less, whatever it takes. If I need more, that's on me, because I messed up on the estimating, and I will not charge you more. And they love that. They love that. They know what they're going to pay.
How do taxes work, Catherine? Like with working with writers or authors in other countries, and dealing with U.S. taxes?
It's not a problem for me. We don't have the, what is it, the VAT that you guys have?
We have HST, GST.
Okay. We don't have that. And because I'm located in the U.S., the authors, the tax laws of where my authors live do not matter to me tax-wise. I just take the money in, and at the end of the year, I report my income to the Internal Revenue Service, and all along throughout the year, periodically, I'm paying estimated taxes, based on how much I think I'm going to earn.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you don't charge tax on top of what?
No.
What rate is? Okay.
Of course, in setting my rates, I figure out for the year what I need and want to earn, what my business expenses are going to be, and how much profit I want, and then I set my rates according to how many hours I think I'm going to work in the year, and it's not 40 hours a week.
How many hours is it?
It could be 25 sometimes, it could be 20.
Yeah.
With the type of editing I do, it goes so slowly. I love it. It's it's like solving a puzzle, but it's very intense, and I feel emotionally drained at the end of the day. So I ain't gonna do 8 hours of ESL editing.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from other editors who do similar work. So it's interesting. Do we have any other questions or comments or anything like that? We're good. Okay, I'm gonna just turn the camera back on me. So. There I am. Okay. So I guess that's it. I want to thank you so much for joining us and trying out this experiment that ended up working really well. So I'm really grateful to you for being my guinea pig. And just to let you know that a donation has been made on your behalf to the Canadian Children's Book Centre, which supports Canadian authors and writers and getting books in schools and things like that. So just want to thank you so much for being with us tonight and all the great
Thank you for having me.